Let's get talking now. Nigeria's inflation rate has reached an all-time high of 20.77%. It's so much of a concern for September 2022 from 20.52% recorded in August of the same year. The nation's inflation rate has been on the upward trajectory since President Buhari assumed office in May 2015. The figure was 9.3% on October 2015. Meanwhile, in another development, Nigeria's Minister of Finance had presented a comprehensive breakdown, yes, of the 20.51 trillion naira 2023 budget estimates. Let's bring you details in this report.
On the 7th of this month, President Muhammadu Buhari presented the 2023 Appropriation Bill to a joint session of the National Assembly. As is the practice, the Minister of Finance, assisted ably by heads of relevant government agencies, formally presents the financial document to the public. She says despite the fears being raised by some Nigerians, the country's debt profile is still within threshold. The minister says revenue generation remains the major fiscal constraint of the Federation.
There will be a link between the NIN number and the tax identification number. So that's another way that we're going to be able to use to track taxpayers' registration as well as tax compliance.
She says 3.3 trillion naira is earmarked for fuel subsidy in the budget for next year, but insists it is no longer sustainable. The ravaging floods in several states of the country is also receiving government's action.
We're going to be looking at measures that need to be taken, first of all, to provide immediate succor to the people that are affected. And yes, we need data for that, but we are also the National Emergency Management Agency, the Ministry of Humanitarian Resources.
A breakdown shows that the education sector has 2.05 trillion naira, representing 10% of the budget. Health gets 1.58 trillion naira, 8% representation of the budget, and security sector hits 2.74 trillion naira, representing 13% of the budget. Some heads of agencies also provided further insights into the budget estimates.
Our goal is to be able to maximize our revenues from oil to support our diversification away from oil.
We are already taking deployment of technology very seriously, and it is impacting positively on whatever we are doing. The business process, the tax filing.
All right there. Well, let's talk live now. And joining me for insights and analysis is Dr. Andrew Nevin. He's the partner and chief economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Dr. Nevin, good afternoon and thank you for your time.
Oh, it's great to be. Always a great pleasure to be with you.
Yes, we've been talking about the budget for some time. Before we move to inflation, a little bit of breakdown here. Health, 1.58 trillion naira. Education, 2.05. Not particular about the amount that has been shared for each sector now, but what is your overview of this 20.51 trillion naira spending plan?
Well, I mean, I think the nation continues to not spend where it should. I mean, obviously, in the short term, there's nothing we can do about the interest expense. We need to find a way to manage down the deficit. But I mean, we're investing about $2 trillion at the FGN budget level in education and health. Those are the things that determine the quality of the future of the nation, the quality of life for young Nigerians. And those are very small numbers. And yet we're spending at least $6 trillion and perhaps more on the foil subsidies. So again, we kind of have, I think, these misplaced priorities. We have spending on the refineries, the FGN refineries to bring them back online, but there's no refinery output coming, for example. So we take the resources we have and rather than put them what would make the biggest difference to our prosperity and to the quality of life, it's just health and education, we're investing them elsewhere. So I think there's still a lot of work to do. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the official GDP number is about 200 trillion a year. So the federal government is spending 2 trillion on health and 2 trillion on education, roughly. It's only about 1%. The number just needs to be much, much bigger.
Subsidy, 3.3 trillion naira for subsidy in 2023. Government seems to now believe that this is really not sustainable. How do we get this across to the masses?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm in the camp of people, and others have said it more eloquently than me, that the subsidy is not about something that benefits the bottom of the pyramid. I mean, the bottom of the pyramid would benefit much more, for example, with a cash transfer, particularly if done in e-Naira, that gets instantly into their wallet they can use for whatever purposes. But they're not using much foil. I mean, the people using the foil are the ones that own the cars. But I mean, we also know a significant amount of the foil gets moved to other countries around West Africa. And indeed, there's phantom foil. There's foil that's being subsidized, at least according to His Royal Highness Muhammadu Sanusi II. He's been very clear that in his research, this foil that's subsidized, it never arrives in countries. So it's a huge leakage. It's an organized system of leakage, and it affects the spending that we're able to do in education and healthcare. And of course, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget, and National Planning, Honorable Minister Ahmed, has been very clear that it should go, and it looked like we were on the path to it going, and then somehow just it's not going to happen before the next election.
Okay, moving on now. Okay, let me wrap up with the budget before I move straight to inflation. At the IMF meetings, that's IMF World Bank meetings, we saw the minister talking about loan restructuring, and many analysts have talked about this. Some say it's the way to go. Some say, no, that's not the way to go. With regards to our debt burden, and we sought requests from the Minister of Finance, do you think that restructuring our loans is the way to go? Yes, we're still going to borrow more one way or the other in 2023 to fund this spending plan.
Well, I mean, it's always been our view. I mean, Nigeria is a very rich country, right? And we have a lot of assets, though, unfortunately, not producing returns. So we're not in any sort of debt crisis. The Honorable Minister has said it's a revenue problem. I've said over the years it's a growth problem. We need to grow faster, but we still have quite a low debt to GDP. So it's not anywhere near a crisis. But what we do need to do is start to grow a bit faster so that we can reduce the debt to GDP ratio further. But in terms of restructuring, I mean, I think what the Honorable Minister is talking about is just simply what any person borrowing money would do is they would reorganize their debt in a way that is the most effective for them. I mean, I don't see the country, it doesn't have any need to repudiate debt. It can change the tenors of debt, it can change the currencies of debt, it can change who's providing the debt. And I think that optimization is going on. And I think what was also very important was her announcement that the Ways and Means mechanism from the CDN is going to be, which was never meant to be a permanent structure, is going to be securitized and turned into a permanent structure. So there's a lot more transparency around it. And we don't have this backdoor financing of the federal government, FGN, by the CBN. So I think these are all good things. I mean, I've dealt with many MDAs here in Abuja. People know now I'm based in Abuja for a while. I have to say that the debt management office is, if not, is among or at the top of the list in terms of the quality of the management, and the DG of the debt management office, Patience Onaha, is just fantastically intelligent, fantastic public civil servant. So this issue, I don't think the nation should be concerned about. What we should be concerned about is getting the growth and the tax revenue to support it. But I think the optimization plan that they put forward makes a lot of sense.
All right, then we'll just take a breather, go back live to all our platforms, DSTV, GoTV. We'll be live now from Business Nigeria. All right, thank you very much. I still have Dr. Andrew Nevin live with me. Now, Dr. Nevin, let's shift our focus from the spending plan to inflation, which of course is high and every month continues to go. The high side, 20.77% is what we have for the month of September. What were you projecting before now, and what do you think? I've had a lot of views around this, but I'd like to get your views. What do you think is responsible for this, and how long are we going to stay on this high side, talking about inflation figures?
Well, I mean, I think people know in general we don't make projections, particularly about the future, because projections are always wrong. And we have to cope in this country, or any country, but particularly our situation. We have to be able to manage in a wide variety of scenarios. But the inflation increase is really troubling, up over 20%, the headline numbers. And of course, everyone has their own individual inflation rate. And what's particularly concerning is inflation rate for food, because I think something like 50% of Nigerians spend more than 50% of their income on food. So that is a real concern for all the reasons we can all understand. Unfortunately, when we move from a 10%, 12% environment inflation to a 20% environment, it really becomes quite unstable, because at 10%, people may just hold on to their Naira or keep it in the bank. But if it's 20%, then you realize you're losing this rapid purchasing power on that. And people start to have different behaviors. I mean, the fact that people here, young people in particular, buy crypto assets is a manifestation that they don't want to hold the Naira, they hold the crypto assets. So I think it is a real concern. Now, part of it, of course, is general rise in inflation around the world. I mean, it hit more than 10% in the UK, and they're having an economic crisis. And of course, the Prime Minister resigned this afternoon as a result of missteps in her budget. But a lot of it's also homegrown. In particular, we continue to have a difficult business environment. Really drives up the cost that we have to do business. For transportation, the poor infrastructure that we have, electricity. And the best way, I think, for us to address our inflation challenge would be to try to make more progress, faster progress on the ease of doing business. I mean, if we take India, for example, I mean, India prices for many goods are perhaps a quarter to a third of developed nations. The quality is the same. They just have, over the years, they didn't have it in the 90s, but certainly the last 15 years, they've built out a good infrastructure, good market mechanisms, highly efficient supply chains, and it's reflected in the cost. There's no reason that Nigeria can't do the same, but we need to bring our costs down by making our supply chains more efficient and have fundamental improvements in the ease of doing business in the country. But I am quite worried as we get over 20% that we're entering some sort of instability in the currency, because, as I said, it's just people's behavior when we hit 20% is really concerning on that. Now, of course, the other contributing factor to inflation is the exchange rate. We haven't done a very good job of diversifying the economy in the last few years, and now oil production has collapsed, which essentially meant even though oil is $93 today, the Brent, we're getting no benefit from oil, and we were not prepared for it. I don't have any insight any more than I read in the press about what's going on in production, other than to say when I arrived in this country, production was over 2 million barrels a day. Last month, it was 0.9 million barrels a day. The oil subsidy eats up any benefit even from that we get from that. So essentially, oil is not contributing to the economy. So it's not a big surprise that we're in such dire straits when oil has disappeared and we haven't replaced it with other exports.
Let's talk about food inflation, which is also on the high side. For September, was 23.34% year-on-year basis. I want us to look at it critically, particularly focusing on interventions that we've had from the central bank. I know we've gone this route before, and of course, not only the central bank, even from the NSIA and all of that. Do you think that this is really yielding anything positive? At the moment, we are grappling with flood that has affected some farmlands. What effect will this have, one way or the other, on expected figures going on in the year?
Well, I mean, it was more than a decade ago now, about a decade ago now, that His Royal Highness Muhammadu Buhari II started the intervention programs in agriculture at the CBN. Up to that time, there'd be no attention to it. I think in the early days, the programs were helpful to highlight that agriculture was really an important segment and a lot needs to go on. And I look around and there's a lot going on. A lot of people are trying to improve these agricultural value chains, the supply chains. People are putting in some investments in it. But I think like a lot of these things, the intervention programs don't necessarily address the fundamentals. And the one fundamental that is really harming the food supply chain is insecurity. And basically what's happening is because of insecurity in different locations around the country, farmers are not venturing out to their fields to plant. They'll plant close to the village for their own usage, subsistence usage. So they have food, but they're not planting larger amounts of cash crops that go to the urban areas. And that's a big contributor to food inflation. Unfortunately, there's no intervention program from the CBN that's going to address that. It's only addressing the insecurity issue. We'll see with the next administration if we can make progress. The second big thing that you really highlight is the impact of climate change. I mean, climate change is here already. It's not some future thing that's happening. We've had these devastating rains. I mean, it's not just Nigeria, but around the world, whether it's the droughts in the major rivers in China, in Europe, in the United States, the recent hurricane in the United States, which happened faster than other hurricanes, or the flooding in Australia. Climate change is here, so we need to have more resilient systems to be able to deal with it. In our context, we've always had flooding to some extent in the nation, but the flooding is going to be more severe, which means that we need, in addition to fixing the insecurity issues, if we're going to be successful in agriculture, we need the mitigation investments in terms of dams, levees, water management systems. We need cooperation with Cameroon. We can't have them releasing the dam without consulting us and flooding things that are further down the river basin. So all of those things are important, but those two things, mitigating climate change and dealing with insecurity, will go a long way to really addressing the food challenges, the supply chain challenges in agriculture, because I do think there's a lot of people out there who are doing things and prepared to do more if those two fundamental issues were addressed. So I would urge the CBN to consider at this point, are the intervention programs really fit for purpose given what we need to focus on, or could they contribute to the whole nation focusing more on these two fundamental issues?
Before I let you go now, how best do you think government can resuscitate this economy, considering loss of food, crops, vegetation, of course, farmlands, and all of these challenges that we face? How best? What are the steps? Do we have any quick wins at all at this time? It's a few months to the elections.
Right. So, I mean, we just put out our paper. I think it's the most important paper we put out in my time in Nigeria. Of course, my time is coming to an end as soon as I retire. But, the paper basically said there's only one real path for prosperity in this decade, which is if more Nigerians work in global value chains, earning FX for Nigeria. So oil at $900,000 barrels a day is not a source of FX for the country, cannot support the country. There are things we need to import. We're not going to produce soon on our own. We may never produce. I mean, countries are not meant to be self-sufficient, but we need to earn FX. Where can we earn it? We're not going to earn it in manufactured goods because we're not competitive in them with our infrastructure, with our electricity situation, with our port situation. We may earn a little bit in agriculture, but where we can earn a lot more is in services. So things like business process outsourcing, developers. There's 28 million developers in the world going to 45 million. We're saying we need 1.2 million of it. That is where the quickest wins come from. And of course, we coined the term on that. This is brain exports. So we need to build brain capital and then export it. We, of course, have a situation where we already export brains. We wrote the paper a few years ago, so we call it the diaspora. But because of COVID and changes in technology, there's a lot more ways for the brain capital to stay in the country, earn FX while staying in Nigeria to address our economic issues and drive prosperity. And they don't have to become part of the diaspora. So that's the strategy that we put forward. We have a very detailed analysis in our recent paper on brain exports on it. But our target is, we put out to the nation, is 2 million people working remotely, so working in Nigeria in global value chains, earning FX for Nigeria. And if we manage to get on the path of that way, I think we'd find we really increased our prosperity and turned around pretty quickly.
Brilliant conversation as usual. I've been speaking to Dr. Andrew Nevin as Chief Economist, partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us on Business Nigeria. We really do appreciate this.
Thank you. Thank you, Tono.